Hello and welcome to the WRAP, WRAL's political podcast. I am state government reporter Will Dorn, and I am here with my colleague Brian Murphy. Brian, good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Will.
So it was just a wild week in both state and national politics. There have been a ton of shakeups in some top leadership roles in the state government, which we're going to get to in a little bit. But first, this is our first episode that we've recorded since the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. We've seen the RNC when he officially accepted the nomination. It's been really busy in national politics. One thing we haven't seen is any polls from here in North Carolina showing what, that assassination attempt has done to the state of the race. I mean, every poll we've seen so far has had Trump up by at least a few points here in North Carolina, but we don't know yet if there's been any sort of galvanization behind him after he survived this attempt on his life. But we have seen some polls that show there is a big increase in support just in general, and, not post-shooting, but, over the past few years for political violence, and people saying they're more willing to accept violence to meet their ends for their political team.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. I mean, in a couple of ways, like you would think, and this is just a sign, I think, of our attention span and how quickly the news cycle moves on, even from an assassination attempt of the former president and leading candidate to be the next president. I'm stunned that we've moved on that quickly from this. And sure, I'm sure some people haven't, but it really does feel like we're 10 news cycles, 12 news cycles past that already. I mean, obviously, a lot of people talked about how unprecedented it was. That was a word I heard a lot. It's not unprecedented.
It's not.
We've had presidents in this country assassinated while in office. We've had them survive attempted assassinations, including Ronald Reagan, which wasn't all that long ago. But as I pointed out during the week in some conversations, Gabby Giffords was a sitting U.S. Congresswoman who was shot in the face during a campaign stop or at least some kind of politically aligned event. We had Steve Scalise, who was the number 3 person in Congress, almost shot and killed during a baseball practice when I lived in Washington, D.C. We saw the Prime Minister of Japan be killed, the former Prime Minister of Japan be assassinated. We've seen January 6th was political violence in its own way, including yet to be discovered, bombs that were laid at the RNC and the DNC on that day. We've never discovered exactly who left those there. So, maybe we have just become more immune to sort of political violence, especially if it doesn't result in someone dying. That is a sad commentary in many ways on where we are as a society.
Yeah, a lot of the experts that we spoke with this week on this issue are really ringing the alarm bells and saying that it's getting to a point where, yes, you need your political leaders to call on people to, tone it down, but that alone isn't going to solve the problem. It's going to take regular people just kind of banding together to say, hey, this sort of thing is not okay. This rhetoric that we're hearing is not okay. And I think one of the quotes we had in one of the stories was, people just need to be friends again with people who think other than them. Well,
I mean, I think social media certainly is playing a role in this. The loudest voices get amplified. There are silos. You can now, because of both cable news and online and the way we're sort of isolated in what we do and where we live, you can really go your whole day, go your whole week, go your whole month without engaging with people who may look or think or act or be different than you. And then you get rewarded online for having the most amplified voice and the most negative voice. And certainly our politics, every candidate, it seems like, at least since, I've sort of come of age, every race has gotten a little bit nastier with, the country's not going to, this is the most important election of your life. And the country's, as you know, it is not going to exist if this person gets elected or that person gets elected. And we're hearing some of that rhetoric, I think, on both sides. If you listen to the RNC, America is slipping away and it's a terrible country. And if you listen to the DNC, this may be the last time you ever get to vote. So, both sides, I think, I don't want to be a both sideser, but, that rhetoric has been amped up, in part because that's what raises money and that's what gets you attention and all of that. In part, I think some people sincerely believe that, but it certainly, I think, can lead to violence. And that's not something any of us want to see.
No, you're exactly right. And I mean, just this week, Vice President Kamala Harris was in Fayetteville, and, we were covering that. And one of the lines she gave in her speech was, "This is an existential election for America." So exactly to your point, that sort of rhetoric that we've been hearing from every candidate for years. But that's something that even just less than a week after, Trump is shot at, we're hearing it again.
I mean, I don't want to make light of it, but you hear all this, like, if you could go back in time and kill baby Hitler, well, if you constantly compare the next candidate to Hitler, and whether that's on the left or the right, well, then you're sort of justifying, well, if that person is really this much of a threat to American democracy, to the American experiment, then you've sort of given a tacit permission to do whatever it takes to not allow that person to take office. And I'm not talking about Trump. I'm talking about either candidate or any candidate, or on the left or the right. If that person is going to destroy this country that we all love and that has been around for 250 years, well, then you sort of implied that, yes, we if anything is, if it's existential threat to the country, that raises the bar of what's acceptable. And I think we're seeing that in these polls that say, yes, maybe I'm okay with political violence.
Yeah. And to be clear, it's not most people who say that they're okay with political violence. It's definitely still a minority, but it is a growing minority.
And as we saw, it only takes one person
exactly
with access to weaponry and by all accounts, an extreme failure of security to take a shot. And that's for the president, right, or the top presidential candidates. There are lots and lots of politicians walking around without that type of security. Members of Congress, senators, state representatives. I mean, there are many people who they don't have protection of the Secret Service. They don't even have a bodyguard. They are exposed. And if this type of rhetoric trickles down to that level, there are lots of people who could be in harm's way.
Yeah, it is almost, I don't know if pleasantly surprising is the right word, but that there haven't been more incidents like this, especially on those lower profile, less protected politicians.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about, Nancy Pelosi's husband was assaulted in his own home by someone who was looking for her and took it out on him. So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, but that political violence issue, let's hope whatever happens in November that there is a way that there's some national healing. I don't want to sound Pollyannish. I know that's probably not going to happen, but it just seems like there was a time where people could disagree without it reaching this kind of levels.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you gave me a good transition, because speaking of Nancy Pelosi, she is going to be in Raleigh on Saturday. She is headlining the Democratic Party's annual Unity Dinner at a time when the Democratic Party is facing anything but unity, with calls for Joe Biden to potentially drop out of the race. There was some, anonymously sourced national reporting that Pelosi herself had a personal conversation with Biden urging him to get out. And also in attendance for this speech is going to be Governor Roy Cooper, who has been floated as a top contender. If Biden were to get out and the nominee were to become Kamala Harris, Cooper is, from everything I've seen, one of maybe 3 or 4 people that's in serious consideration to become that VP. Now, I should note that this Pelosi visit was planned months ago. This is not, her coming to scope out Cooper at the last second. This has been in the works for months. It's just sort of a coincidence that all of these things are coming to a head right as she is going to be here. But, it's something we're going to be watching closely. I think you're planning on being there for us.
Yeah, I think Nancy Pelosi is a fascinating figure. She probably is the most powerful elected Democrat in many ways. I mean, obviously Joe Biden is, but within the party, I mean, she can count votes better than anyone in the party, and maybe better than anyone, in a long time in Congress, and sort of knows how to wield power in a way that some Democrats probably find off-putting, but, she get a lot of stuff done with very slim majorities, knows kind of how to wield power. And if she thinks that the House of Representatives and Congress and all of it, the presidency, is slipping away, it does seem like she can maybe the only politician that can wield the kind of power it takes to get Joe Biden out of this race. It is very fascinating. I don't know what will come of that event and how much of that intrigue we'll get. But to have someone that powerful in North Carolina is very interesting. And the Cooper stuff is, there's a lot of ifs, but he fits the profile in many ways. And I think we'll write about this on Sunday. check our website. But he fits the profile in many ways of what Kamala Harris, a presidential nominee Kamala Harris, would need on her ticket. He's from a swing state. He's a straight white male, and identity politics matter. We'll be blunt about it.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, you see him mentioned with other straight white males who are also from swing states, people like Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona or Governor Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania. Andy Beshears, who's from Kentucky, is another young, male governor, not necessarily in a swing state, but you can see sort of the profile that people are looking for. And one thing I would mention with Cooper is that he doesn't really block anyone. If he were the nominee and that ticket were to win, he's probably not going to run for president after 2 terms or whatever.
Right. He's 67 now, so he would be into his 70s, the next time he could
and we've seen what
run for president.
There.
And I don't think either party is going to want to do that come 2028, 2032.
And then if that ticket were to lose, if the Harris-Cooper ticket were to lose, again, we're making tons and tons of ifs and assumptions on this. If that ticket were to lose, again, I don't think he would be blocking anyone's path toward the nomination or the presidency. And so in some ways, he's a very safe choice. If you were to elevate a Mark Kelly or a Josh Shapiro, suddenly they would get in line to become the next nominee, or at least have a shot at the next
Other
nominee.
powerful Democrats could see them as a threat that maybe Cooper is not.
Which is one reason why, and we'll switch gears quickly here, one reason why I find it so fascinating that Trump picked J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is 39 years old. As Trump said during his speech, he's going to be in the game for a long time. Well, he just leapfrogged everybody. If you're a vice presidential nominee, chances are you're going to run for president. Almost every single one does. And the chances are not as good that you'll get the nomination, but they're still better than an average senator's chances.
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in Ron DeSantis' living room when J.D. Vance got picked.
Right. He's leapfrogged DeSantis. He's leapfrogged Rubio, Ted Cruz. I mean, all these people who thought, okay, we'll wait out Trump and then we'll be prepared. Well, now there's a new name at the top of the line, at the top of the, I still think Donald Trump Jr. is the name at the top of is first in line, but J.D. Vance is certainly second in line now.
Yeah. These moving pieces are huge. But one last thing before we take a break and come back into more local state stuff. Should note the fundraising in the governor's race that we've got here. One of the reasons Pelosi is in town is to raise a bunch of money for local Democrats, because North Carolina is not just about being a swing state this year. It's about the governor's race. It's about Democrats trying to break the GOP supermajority. It's about Democrats trying to defend their seat on the state Supreme Court that's up for election this year. A lot of stuff going on there. Actually, Eric Holder held a fundraiser with Allison Riggs, the Supreme Court justice here, who I wrote about that this week. There were, some criticism that, Eric Holder is someone who sues North Carolina pretty frequently. And then here he is, doing a fundraiser with a sitting, actually both of our sitting Democratic justices on the Supreme Court. Definitely some eyebrows raised on that, some harsh criticism from the Republican Party. But, I checked the ethics rules with the court system, no ethics rules broken, because turns out we actually have very few ethics rules when it comes to judges here in North Carolina.
And you did a lot of reporting on this. What I find fascinating, you educate me. Democrats are swamping Republicans when it comes to raising money in many of these high-profile races, including governor, Tricia Cotham's being outraised, heavily, many other superintendent of public instruction. But in the end, I would say Republicans are favored to win many of those seats.
Yeah, well, part of the reason why Democrats need to raise more money is because they start off at a bit of a disadvantage. So, here in North Carolina, we've seen, Roy Cooper, he barely beat Pat McCrory in 2016. It was, 10,000 votes? I think people correct me if I'm wrong on that. But, he did it by outraising McCrory by millions and millions and millions of dollars. And we're seeing sort of the same trend right now in the governor's race. Mark Robinson broke all sorts of records for Republican candidates for governor. As of June, he had raised $16 million, which was more than any other GOP candidate, including McCrory when he was the incumbent running for re-election. Even though he broke all these records, he didn't even raise half as much as what Josh Stein just raised. Stein has $33 million. So this is absolutely on track to become the most expensive governor's race ever. It's just wads of money being thrown at this. We're at $50 million combined, and that's just the candidates. That's not even counting all of the outside PACs and other groups that are going to get involved. So,
and if you ask where that money goes, just turn on your television.
Yes.
You cannot get through a commercial break without a Josh Stein or a Mark Robinson or one of these affiliated groups, coming on your television.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that in mind, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the state of state politics and some big name departures that we saw this week. Stick around. And we are back with the wrap. I am Will Doran here with my colleague Brian Murphy. Brian, a lot of big names leaving in some pretty high-profile leadership jobs. You've written about a few of them, including Randy Woodson this week.
Yeah, NC State Chancellor Randy Woodson, who's been on the job since 2010, announced that this is his final year. June of 2025, when his contract expires, he is going to retire. And that means that the two biggest, most influential, richest schools in the UNC system now have vacancies for chancellor, including UNC, which is in the middle of its search for a permanent chancellor to replace Kevin Guskiewicz. And we're seeing this across the UNC system. These are 2 of 4 schools that now have openings for their permanent chancellor. We've seen 4 of those openings filled already in 2024. That means 8 system schools have either replaced their chancellor or are looking for a permanent chancellor, about half of the system. And that's what we're hearing across the country. About half of the top 50 schools, public, private universities in the country have replaced their top person, whether it's a president or a chancellor, in the last year, 2.5 years since the beginning of 2022. Some of that is COVID. Some of these leaders stayed on, and I think Woodson is a case of this, probably stayed on longer than he planned to, trying to help the university get through the COVID period. Woodson could have signed a 5-year extension, only signed a 2-year extension in 2023. And Peter Hans, the system president, said, we were grateful for that.
Yeah, I noticed that quote in your story that they weren't even sure if they were going to get him at all or if he was just going to leave in 2022.
Yeah, that they twisted his arm to keep him around. And, the search committee that's helping UNC talked about a war for talent at these universities. I mean, these are highly paid jobs, but they're complex jobs. You're dealing with a lot of, we talked about COVID, but you're dealing with politics. You're dealing with, my side job here, athletics. There is a lot of moving parts at these universities.
You got to raise a bunch of money. You got to act as a buffer between your usually liberal-leaning faculty and students, and in a state like North Carolina, the very conservative state legislature that dictates your budget and can punish you if they don't like what they're seeing coming out of your campus.
Yeah, and like in Woodson's case, you're dealing with Poe Hall. You're dealing with a medical emergency calamity in many ways. This a cluster of cancer cases from a building on campus. Randy Woodson had nothing. I mean, I'm not absolving him of any responsibility, but it's not his fault that there's cancer in this building or cancerous causing materials in this building. Now he has to deal with that he has to deal with victims and making sure they feel that they're being treated properly, making sure that the building is remediated in some way. I mean, these jobs are so complex. You never know where the next fire is going to pop up. I mean, one part of Randy Woodson's legacy that will far outlive his tenure at NC State is voting to expand the ACC.
Yeah, we have no idea what that's going to do,
right?
Even the next few years, let alone 20 years from now.
Yeah, so these jobs have become so big that you never know where the next fire is going to break out. It could be Poe Hall, which is a horrible, horrible situation. Our colleague Keely Arthur has done tremendous reporting on it. I would encourage you to go back and read a lot of that. More than 200 people have reached out to WRAL to say that they have cancer or in some cases have passed away from cancer, and they used to work or study in Poe Hall. You never know when the ACC is going to fall apart or at UNC Chapel Hill, there's going to be protests on your campus where they take down the American flag and raise a Palestinian flag. Like these jobs, and we'll get to other people who have left who are in similar positions where you don't know where the next problem is going to arise. How difficult a job is that?
And it's like doing advanced calculus to say, okay, if we respond in this way, what is the fallout in this other scenario going to become? And
yeah, I don't want to make it sound like I'm apologizing for these, but we're seeing shorter and shorter tenures from chancellors and presidents. At the University of Florida, Ben Sasse just resigned. He's a former
2
U.S.
years
senator
on the job, maybe.
Now his wife is very sick, and he's resigning to take care of her. So, add in your personal life on top of it. These are very, very difficult jobs, and I think we're going to see shorter and shorter tenures Woodson was there for 15 years.
Which is like triple the average, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that people can do that job for that long. And the pay is getting good enough where you don't necessarily have to do it for 15 years.
Well, and if you're good at it, you're going to get paid a lot more by somewhere else. Kevin Guskowitz, when he was at UNC, was getting paid around a little over $600,000, and then he got poached by Michigan State, which is paying him $1 million a year.
Yeah, I mean, and they're with so many openings around the country, and I mean, look at the size of these endowments. I mean, NC State's endowment is over $2 billion. That's 4 times what it was when Woodson took over. So these places have a lot of money to go attract top talent as well. And so, and I think we're seeing it in other things. I wrote about Jason Sain this week. Jason Sain, Republican House member, chairman of the Budget Committee, as powerful a representative as you could have outside of the speaker, decided, it's time for me to go, and got a lucrative job outside of the legislature. Ashton Clemens, a top Democratic representative, is leaving. She got a job with the UNC system.
Both of these people really seen as, rising stars, or in Sain's case, kind of an established star in state politics. But, legislature pays $13,000 a year, and it is a full-time job. You cannot hold down a side job, really, in the legislature. And so, a lot of these people, even if they are, seem like they have promising careers ahead of them, you gotta take care of yourself and your family.
Yeah, and Sain was someone who talked about perhaps being speaker someday, but decided. I think I talked to him, and one of the interesting things was that the lack of a budget deal. He's the chairman of the Budget Writing Committee. Said he worked for 6 months to try to get a budget deal. They got within $16 million, he said. Now, Phil Berger will probably disagree with that assessment, and then they got no deal. So imagine pouring 6 months of your life into something, and then the end result is nothing happens. You could see why someone might be like, okay, looking for the exits.
Time to throw in the towel on this. Yeah.
And I don't want to put words into Ashton Clemens' mouth, but, she's in the minority. She's in the super minority. Very little of what she's hoping to accomplish is going to get done when you have an opportunity to maybe leave and work at a job that you can accomplish some of your goals. That's got to become mighty, mighty tempting.
Yeah, I think it is for a lot of folks. And it's not just been state lawmakers that we've been seeing resign this week. 2 chiefs of staff for some of the most powerful people in politics are also out the door. Brian Fork, who's the chief of staff for Phil Berger, is leaving for a job at the Carolina Hurricanes. And Governor Cooper's chief of staff, Christy Jones, was just announced on Friday that she's leaving for an unknown destination in the private sector.
Yeah, I mean, again, we these private sector jobs are in some ways probably more lucrative and more fulfilling. This is my sports bias coming out, but Brian Fork, that job now is a chance to remake what part of Raleigh looks like, with an $800 million investment in developing these 80 acres around PNC Arena. PNC Arena itself is getting a $300 million renovation. The team is good enough that maybe you could win the Stanley Cup and get a Stanley Cup ring, get a day with the cup. I mean, there are some really, again, that's some of my sports bias coming out, but that sounds pretty exciting to be able to make things happen that quickly, maybe over the next 10 or 20 years. Government moves a lot slower than that at times.
Indeed it does. So we'll be looking forward to seeing what their replacements do. Cooper's new chief of staff is going to be Julia White. That's someone who he's worked with since his state Senate days. He's been in politics for a really long time. And Berger's new chief of staff is Colt Olm, who's a longtime staffer. He's been about, I think, a little over a decade working for Berger in the Senate there. So 2 longtime folks who really know what they're doing, taking over the reins. Speaking of state government moving slowly, or sometimes not so slowly, I was wrong. In the last episode, I said that I was counting on Blue Cross to appeal its loss in the multi-billion-dollar lawsuit over control of the state health plan. They did not. So my prediction there did not come to fruition. They decided to not drag out this fight over control of the state health plan with Aetna. That is going to switch over to Aetna in January. Tons and tons of money spent fighting this decision by the state health plan to switch control of that contract. And it's a $10 billion contract. So,
I mean, you talk about things that actually impact people. We've talked about a whole lot of things this one topic may impact more people than all the things we talked about previously. If you're a state worker, your health insurance is changing.
Yeah. We don't know yet what this is going to mean for people's premiums, but it probably will mean something for people's premiums. And, we've reported in the past, Aetna, which is taking over, has actually more providers and more options in urban areas, but fewer in rural areas. So, some definitely, real world impacts for people there's 750,000 people on the state health plan.
And you're likely going to have to find a new doctor or who's in the system, who's in network. All these words that we hear about all the time, in network doctors. I mean, you're talking about Blue Cross has been the provider for a really long time.
40 years.
And so you probably have built up a medical history with one provider that is covered by Blue Shield. Now, who knows? Maybe Aetna covers many of the same doctors, but sometimes we get jaded's not the right word, but sometimes we talk about these things like they don't have any impacts, right? This person's leaving, this person's coming, this debate or whatever, this person's coming for a fundraiser. We talk about millions of dollars. This is something that the state government did that is going to have a direct impact on 750,000 people plus their families.
Yep. So starting January 1, that impact is going to become real for people. A little bit less into the future, next week at the state legislature, there's going to be an oversight hearing on the Board of Elections. They want to grill them about RFK Jr. and Cornel West. Obviously, the board this week decided to allow RFK Jr. on the ballot, but not Cornel West. There has been talk of West or his allies suing to get on the ballot. As of the time that we're recording this, there's no word that lawsuit has actually been filed yet, so we're still waiting to see if and when that happens. But in the meantime, state lawmakers are going to be have some of our top elections officials under oath asking them questions about how they made those decisions.
I'll be interested to see if any changes come out of this. Certainly, Cornel West and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. have exposed a loophole in the state's election laws where, as an individual, you need to get somewhere around 90,000 signatures, but as a party, you only need to get less than 14,000 signatures. And so you have people who are really independents forming new parties because it's a whole lot easier to get on the ballot as a new party. Maybe that's a bug. Maybe it's a feature. I don't know how that got written into the law exactly, but I do wonder if lawmakers will take a look at that at some point.
Yeah, or the courts. I mean, the chair of the elections board explicitly encouraged people to sue them for allowing RFK Jr. on the ballot. He said, I don't think that we have the power to deny him based on all of the evidence that we've seen, but I think he is abusing the process, and if someone would like to file a lawsuit, go for it. So you don't see that very often.
Please, that's someone who doesn't have to defend himself with his own money.
Right. Yes, exactly. Well, on that note, we will watch for all of those lawsuits. We will keep watching for things that affect people and their own wallets here in North Carolina. And please tune in and catch us next time on The Wrap.